Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Friday, August 12th. Also a great pleasure to have with us in our virtual studio, Lola Duffort, who covers politics for VTDigger. Lola, great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Andrew.
Well, our timing is perfect. This has been a very busy week in Vermont politics. It's been a busy month or two, actually, for that matter. And so to have you on today to help us all unpack what we saw going on in the voting earlier this week is perfect. And I thought we could start with what I assume is probably the most widely watched race of all the ones that were on the ballot, and that's the one for U.S. Congress, and in particular the Democratic primary side of it, where State Senator Becca Balint was competing against Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray, and a race that I guess 3 or 4 or 5 months ago you would have said was going to be a close toss-up turned out to be I think it's fair to characterize it as a blowout win for Senator Balint, who won, I think, by 60% of the vote to roughly 36 or so for the lieutenant governor. You have a really interesting story in today's Digger about the race, and I guess I just wondered if you could share with us a little bit about what your reporting turned out, information turned out to shed light on how that race turned out.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. And actually, it's kind of nice to have this format to unpack it because honestly, I feel like there was a lot more to unpack than I was able to kind of analyze in 1,500 words. But I think I think a very simple and true story is that Becca Balint won for two reasons. And that was she was a politician that people felt like they could connect to. She felt relatable. She felt, quote unquote, authentic. This is something I got a lot from just voters. And kind of going into this race, I remember talking to an editor and we were like, Becca Balint is one of the most charismatic politicians we know. I think the question will be like, can she translate that to a statewide stage, especially in a compressed period of time? And she clearly was. And also she picked a winning message. And it's kind of trite, but like she was a politician that people liked and she had a winning message. And I think the message was definitely a left-leaning one, right? She ran as a progressive, but kind of in an inclusionary way. She wasn't trying to alienate moderates as she did so. And I think it is obviously usually safer to run on the left if you're in a Democratic primary, and particularly if you're in a Democratic primary for Congress in Vermont, right? Like Vermonters have kind of traditionally liked more moderate, steady hand when it comes to like executive leadership. We've seen a lot of conservative Democrats win, in gubernatorial races, but they tend to like kind of more firebrand, lefty representatives when it comes to Congress. And so she picked the right message and she was able to deliver it in a way that felt true and trustworthy to most people. So I think that's why she won. I think the reasons why she won by the margins she won by, I think that's when it gets a little bit more complicated. And I think that there's a lot to why Molly Gray lost so badly. And I think, although I think you can sort of boil it down to, she kind of profoundly misread the electorate, right? And I think it made sense to run as a moderate when there were two progressives in the race. But one of those progressives dropped out and backed Becca Balint. And so when it became a head-to-head, that became a much less safe calculation. And, she also, she ran in a way that also kind of rejected the more left-leaning parts of Vermont. She had this interview that went around a lot. I think it was on Monday, right before the race. And she said, this is a race between, do you want the next Bernie Sanders or do you want the next Peter Welch? And the thing is that Vermonters like both of those, right? They love Bernie and sorry, I said Peter Welch. Pat Leahy or Peter Welch. The thing is, Vermonters love all three of those men, right? Even as Becca Balint, was backed by Bernie, her message never really rejected other parts of the electorate. And so I think that happened. And I also think, I'm sorry for rambling, but I was talking to Liz Mankowski, who ran Madeleine Kunin's 1984, historic race. And Madeleine Kunin obviously backed Molly Gray. But, she said this thing that I thought was very important and profound, which is that female candidates will have their credentials questioned much more than male candidates. And, I think that made Molly Gray vulnerable because her accomplishments were going to be a little less legible to the public, right? Like Becca Balint could say, I worked on these major bills. And Molly Gray served in a largely ceremonial role. And it's funny because, Vermonters have been willing to reward a series of men who held the lieutenant governorship with higher office. But I think if you are a woman, you were vulnerable to more people taking a second look and being like, wait, actually, this is a largely powerless and ceremonial role. Like, why does that matter? So, a lot to unpack.
It also surprised me that Molly Gray placed such emphasis on the campaign financing aspect of this. Her constant criticisms of the Political Action Committee money that said was coming to Senator Balint. I guess I wonder if that accusation or charge really, it clearly didn't seem to resonate very much.
It was my impression that voters were more concerned about the person. I don't think they cared at all about campaign finance. It never came up when I was talking to voters. I do think that the Gray camp's kind of relentless attacks about this probably soured. I mean, I know it soured a lot of Democratic insiders. And I don't know how much negative campaigning hurt her with the electorate, but it was my impression that it hurt her very badly with folks in and around Democratic politics in Vermont. And I wonder how much, I think it's very plausible that hurt her in terms of, the folks that were willing to help the campaign or not. I don't know how much your average voter was frankly clued into that conversation. But I think we can't kind of conclusively, or you can't really conclusively say any of this, but I feel much more confident saying that it really looks like, at least it never put it, it never damaged Becca Balint to go after her about this. And likely backfired in other ways for the Gray camp.
Well, turning to the Republican side of the primary for the U.S. congressional seat, we have another interesting kind of outcome there. At least it was to me anyway. Liam Madden, the former Marine who I guess indicated initially he was going to identified as an independent as opposed to Republican, wound up winning a three-way contest there. And since Tuesday, I guess you've probably been following this more closely than I. He seemed to indicate, my understanding was anyway, he seemed to indicate that he was going to run as an independent after all, but then has switched back since then and now is going to be on the Republican party line. And then one of the two candidates he defeated in the primary, Erica Reddick, apparently has indicated an interest in being on the Libertarian Party line and continuing on, which would seem to be bad news for Madden. I would imagine the two of them would split the anti-ballot vote, and basically almost hand the election to her on a silver platter.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the election might be handed to her on a silver platter anyways, just given that it's Vermont. Yes, I think that will make their margins even worse. I don't know that the Ballant camp is probably watching this and like relieved in any way. I think, and they've been saying this for months. I mean, anyone who's been in these races, at least on the Democratic side, has been saying this for months, which is that the primary is the election. Of course, there will be an election in November and people should vote and decide for themselves. But I don't know how much that's going to affect the outcome. I do think it certainly says something interesting about, the state of the bench in Republican politics, right? That the person who won the nomination on the GOP side for the House race doesn't consider himself a Republican, and said, I don't even want this nomination. And also he was very honest when he was running that he didn't consider himself a Republican, right? It's not like he was pulling the wool over anyone's eyes, although I think a lot of Republicans resented him and kind of accused him of that. But, he's very open about the fact that he didn't consider himself a member of the GOP. So that's certainly interesting. And of course, he is now going to be running as a Republican because, the Secretary of State's office said, well, you can't run as an independent. You didn't register in time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the state of that race.
Well, it'll be fun to watch the rest of the way until November. Turning to the Senate race there, I guess no surprise whatsoever that Congressman Peter Welch overwhelmingly won that Democratic primary by a very, very, very wide margin. But it was a bit of surprise to me that over on the Republican side, Gerald Malloy, a political newcomer, defeated Christina Nolan, the former U.S. attorney for Vermont, who seemed to have the backing of the establishment Republican Party in Vermont. Former Governor Jim Douglas was her campaign chairman. It was a fairly close race. I think about 1,300 votes separated the two, but still, what did you make of that? Gerald Malloy kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, for me, that was one of the that was probably the most interesting outcome for me on Tuesday, mostly because it seemed like the Becca Ballant and Molly Gray race by that time kind of seemed like a foregone conclusion. But that was a very interesting upset, and certainly one of those moments where I was like, wow, punditry really is the lowest form of journalism, because I did not see that coming. Christina Nolan was backed by every kind of big, important Republican figure in Vermont, both on kind of the moderate wing. So Phil Scott obviously endorsed her right out of the gate, but also, much more conservative Republicans involved in politics in Vermont. She was the chosen one. She did fundraisers with Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins. So she was also backed by, the Republican establishment nationally. Rick Scott was talking about her in the Hill as, this could be a sleeper race. This could be like the person who takes Vermont back for Republicans. So absolutely no one was expecting this to happen. Least of which I think is, the Republican establishment, both nationally and in Vermont. But it was a pretty close race, and also, just a very low turnout race. Like far fewer people pulled a Republican ballot than pulled a Democratic ballot. So this is a pretty small slice of the electorate. I wonder if it says, and I think it may indicate that the Republican electorate in Vermont is much more conservative and growing much more conservative, right? I think people have been asking themselves the question for a few years now, like, whose party is it? You know, is it Phil Scott's party? Is it Donald Trump's party? You know, the outcome of that race was certainly a very interesting, telling data point. Although I don't think Gerald Malloy explicitly ran as like a pro, you know, Trump Republican, but very hardline conservative, you know, like even said, I would vote for a nationwide abortion ban.
He wants to build a wall.
He wants to build a wall, right? So a lot of things that are kind of, you know, like a gesture at Trump, right? I think he was backed by another group that is like something America First. I can't remember exactly the name of it, but there are a lot of like Trumpy buzzwords in his platform, which would indicate those leanings. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought it was a super interesting race and outcome. And I think one that will, anyways, I'm rambling.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had the same conclusion about how, well, this clearly shows that the Republican base voter in Vermont has definitely kind of followed more national trends, you might say, and they shifted right. But then in the lieutenant governor's race, again, on the Republican side, you had State Senator Joe Benning defeating Gregory Thayer, a former alderman from Rutland. Again, a fairly close margin, I think about 2,400 votes or so. But Benning would have been the sort of a quote unquote establishment candidate there. Thayer, again, was a more right wing type figure. So, you know, it's kind of hard to say, you know, kind of, well, how do you explain that? I mean, did Benning just run such a much better campaign than Thayer, or had more money to spend, or got the word out? I don't know.
I think, again, that's impossible to say conclusively. I think probably a few things played into it. You know, Benning has been a politician for longer, so has run a race. So I think that probably helped him. I think another thing that really helped him, I would suspect, is the fact that he is a man. You know, the Republicans on the Senate side were running a woman and a lesbian. And I wonder how much that hurt her with that base electorate. And so I wonder if that was the difference between, because Greg Thayer still had a very strong showing, right? And this is someone that proudly attended the January 6th insurrection,
right?
And still got a huge chunk of the Republican electorate. So I think both of those races still indicate that there is obviously a rightward shift. And I am speculating here, but I wonder if the difference between a strong showing and winning in those races was gender, you know. And I remember, you know, like, just Twitter is not real life, but, you know, sometimes I would just look at Christina Nolan's posts and, you know, there'd be some just like horrible things said about her. Very just gendered, sexist, homophobic things. And I wonder if that impacted the race.
Yeah, well, good point. Could well have done so. Let's flip over then to the Democratic side there, where David Zuckerman made a bit of a comeback and is now going to be the nominee for the lieutenant governor's race on the Democrat and progressive lines. That was a close call there with between him and former Representative Kitty Toll. I guess I found myself thinking, had there not been four candidates in that race, Patricia Preston and Charlie Kimball, Representative Charlie Kimball, that might have, given the race to former Representative Toll. Do you think, or was Zuckerman's name recognition factor so large that kind of really carried the day for him?
I think name ID and association with Bernie obviously really helped him. But yeah, I don't think you can look at those results and not think that, yes, it is very likely that the presence of Patricia Preston and Charlie Kimball, who were both kind of read as moderate Democrats, spoiled the race for Kitty Toll. I mean, it's impossible to know exactly where their votes would have gone. And I think Patricia Preston might also be a little bit more complicated in terms of like where her votes went, because she was based in Burlington and she was young. And I wonder like how many quote unquote more progressive voters might have just picked her because of that, right? Like she was from the area and young and maybe felt a little bit more fresh than David Zuckerman. And so he might have picked up some of her votes, but I think that it is, yeah, very, very likely that if those candidates had not been in the race, it would have gone to Toll, because at the end of the day, they were the more moderate candidates, and David Zuckerman was it's always been kind of the more progressive. So, and especially given just how much of the vote they got, I think between Charlie Kimball and Patricia Preston, I mean, it was pretty close to 20% of the vote. They actually had pretty strong showings.
Yeah.
And I've certainly heard privately from a lot of Democratic types that is what they think happened. And are pretty sour about it. And I'll note that this is also kind of what happened when Dave Zuckerman ran his first competitive contested primary for lieutenant governor. There was a split Democratic vote, and obviously he won the election. So,
yeah. Well, I thought that the lieutenant governor's race was one of the more interesting ones going on this year, because it would seem to me that the winner, whoever winds up winning in the end, whether it's Zuckerman or Joe Benning, is going to be in a great position to run for the top job in 2024. I mean, assuming you figure that Phil Scott is going to win the governor's race, we sort of skipped over that. There was no real primary battle on either side there. I think Brenda Siegel has an enormous uphill battle to, make that a competitive race. But, I guess it's an unusual year, so anything I guess is possible. But assuming Phil Scott were to win what would be his fourth term, I guess I find myself wondering: do you think that would be his last, and therefore whoever is lieutenant governor is really in a prime position to kind of make a bid for the top job?
I would assume that David Zuckerman has not told me this is what he's going to do. Most lieutenant governors run for governor.
Right.
Dave
They look in the mirror and they see a future governor.
Yeah, David Zuckerman himself ran for governor. So I think there's a very, very good chance that Dave Zuckerman, if he prevails, as he is likely to, just because of the leaning of the electorate, will run. I believe that Joe Benning would not, because I seem to recall that he said he would serve at least 2 terms, and kind of rejected this notion that the lieutenant governorship should be just like a stepping stone to running for governor. So I hope I'm not misremembering that, but I believe he's actually committed.
I think you're right. Now that you mentioned that, I recall hearing the same thing. Yeah.
So I think that, I think it's very likely that if Dave Zuckerman wins, that he will run. I don't know if he'll be well positioned to do so. I mean, obviously he's got enormous name ID. Bernie will almost certainly back him again. But he already won and lost very badly. And I wonder how much that will stick to him. Change is a powerful force. And so, but I don't, he'd still have, he'll have run, I don't know how many statewide races at that point. So it's not like he won't have points in his corner as to why he would be a strong candidate. But I don't think he would necessarily be I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. So otherwise, on the other races that were statewide for the Attorney General, Charity Clark won by a wide margin over Rory Shebold. I personally thought that was going to be a much closer race than it turned out to be, but Charity Clark, who of course has a big following down here in Bennington County, being from Manchester and the Londonderry area, made several visits down here. The Secretary of State race was kind of interesting. Representative Sarah Copeland-Hanzas winning by a fairly narrow margin over the Deputy Secretary of State, Chris Winters. I guess there's not much more to say about that, but I guess it must have been nice for Representative Copeland-Hanzas to win that one, because I think she tried for the speakership of the House a couple of times and didn't get there, but now is very likely to go on, since the Republican opponent is going to be H. Brooks Page, which was another interesting story in and of himself, I guess, having been on the line for I think four positions altogether. Before we have to run, we just have a couple of minutes left. I guess I just wondered what your thoughts were about the turnout, the voter turnout in the race. Roughly 26% of eligible voters doesn't sound like a lot to me. And I guess I just wondered if you thought August is not a great time to have a primary.
August is not a great time to have a primary, but also folks don't really come out for primaries and they don't really come out for midterms. And yeah, this was the, I think, second highest ever turnout for a primary. So almost a record breaker. But I actually had this debate internally with an editor, because I had referred to this as a low turnout election in a story. And he was like, well, it was, the second highest ever. And I was like, it was still low turnout. It was still 25% of the electorate, that's not, that is not a lot.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess the bar for breaking records is just very low in primaries. Although I was looking at, the numbers that we've had in previous years, and we've had single digits, like 9% turning out. So I guess relative to other primaries, yes, quite high, and that's good. But relative to the number of people that could be voting, still very, very low, and that's bad.
Particularly in a year when there were a lot of competitive races and open seats, and with Senator Patrick Leahy retiring and this whole ripple effect down the line, people trying to move up. I would have thought we would have seen a much higher number than 26%, but
right.
Guess
yeah,
not.
especially since the primary in so many races will probably be on the Democratic side, will probably be determinative, right? And so you would hope that you would have more people weighing in at this stage in the process.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for today. Boy, there's so many more things to talk about. One of the things I'm very curious to see is the makeup of the state legislature next year. If we see roughly the same division between Democrats, Republicans, Progressives, Independents, how that shakes out, and what are some of the big issues that will be on the front burner for the state legislature in 2023. It'll be interesting to see, indeed, where they land on all of that. But we've got plenty to work with between now and November, at least, anyway. And once again, Lola, thank you so much for making the time for this conversation today. I really appreciate it. You do a fabulous job at Digger, and I always read your stories. So
thank you so much.
Anyway, well. Thanks to all of you for being with us today as well. I hope you found our conversation interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day. Thank you very much.